The Roots of Suffering and the Birth of a Legend. York Ellsworth has always been proud of his heritage, descended from an English soldier who was part of the first colonists of Australia. 80 years ago, when the first convicts and guards arrived in the colony under the strict command of Ragnald Tempest, life here was full of hardships and dangers. York, accompanied by her distant relative Elspeth Merrifield, decided to find out how exactly their ancestors were able to survive in these difficult conditions and maintain human dignity. In the early years of the colony, everything seemed doomed to failure. The prisoners and guards who had settled in the flatlands of southeastern New South Wales faced constant starvation. The Great Dividing Range served as a barrier, blocking access to the interior of the continent, and the Tasman Sea brought cold winds, worsening the situation for the settlers. Food was brought by ship from as far away as Indonesia and South Africa, and any unfavorable current forced the people to endure weeks of starvation. Ragnald Tempest was a stern and uncompromising commander. His authoritarian style of management bred fear and discontent among the guards and prisoners. Elspeth told York of the many risks their ancestors had taken to acquire the last grain to maintain their energy and spirit in these harsh conditions. Tempest believed that strict discipline was the only way to maintain order, but his methods often bred hidden resistance and mistrust. York knew that he couldn't simply look at the past through the lens of survival and punishment. He was searching for deeper meaning, which led him to reach out to elders to hear stories that were difficult to find in documents and official records. This is how he met Kumaranje, a wise Aboriginal elder who had deep knowledge of spiritual practices and the history of the land. Kumaranje, a humble and wise man, listened with rapt attention to the stories of York and Elspeth. He spoke of how his people had been forced to retreat inland by outsiders, but had retained their connection to the land and the spiritual practices of their ancestors. The old man explained that many of these practices were focused on harmony with nature and an understanding of the deep laws of the universe that transcended human fear and suffering. Guide Barrow Clayton, a man with experience in difficult journeys, accompanied York and Elspeth on their exploration. His knowledge of the Australian landscape, the desert air and climate changes helped the group survive and move forward. Barrow often became the link between the traditions of the colonizers and the understanding of local conditions, which helped to broaden the explorers' views. Beyond the spiritual quest, the journeys presented the heroes with real-life challenges. They followed the routes their ancestors had taken, crossing the vast expanses of Central Australia and the Great Sandy Desert, realizing how helpless life seemed in those conditions. York listened to Kumaranje, who spoke of the power of selflessness and the need to share what you have left, even if it seemed like a prerequisite for death. One of the turning points was a meeting with the tribal mediator, Jaga Yalara, who spoke about the relationship between the Aborigines and the first settlers. According to many of the indigenous people, at first they were hostile to the strangers. But when they saw how some of them, in the conditions of hunger, did not close their hearts and shared food, they reconsidered their attitude. This fact became a symbol of hope and was a harbinger of new discoveries in spiritual interaction. Tarvin Southstraight, a sailor with extensive experience in sea routes and trade, added details about the conditions of supply and how the capricious weather affected the colony's existence. His stories helped to illustrate how fragile the balance between life and death was in those distant lands. The story, told by traveller and chronicler Sybil Ward, enriched York and Elspeth's view of the intertwined destinies of the descendants of the colonizers and the Aboriginal people. She noted that despite the many difficulties, it was through unity and spiritual understanding between cultures that the path to healing and progress could be found. It was this mixture of challenges, strength of character, and ancient wisdom that inspired York to continue his quest. He decided that the true path was not just about physical survival, but also about selflessness, spiritual fortitude, and respect for indigenous traditions. His attitude to life, shaped by Kumaranje and the stories he heard in the Australian outback, became the basis for creating new meanings. The path to knowledge was long and thorny, moving from one understanding to another, like waves washing coastal rocks. But inside York, an understanding was growing that the key to liberation from suffering lies in the ability to see and accept the connection of all living beings, and to follow the law of selflessness. Thus began a new page in life, full of hopes and discoveries, leading to the acquisition of real peace. The shadows of the past gradually receded against the backdrop of bright prospects, and new encounters with the natives built bridges between cultures. This was only the beginning of a long and profound journey that was to reveal secrets and forces capable of changing not only the lives of individuals, but the fate of an entire continent. The story was already finding a lively response in the hearts of those who sought answers, and soon the story would acquire a new depth of meaning. Meeting with ancient wisdom and testing the path. York Ellsworth, descendant of an English soldier and a persistent seeker of the true path, stood at the edge of a great crossing over the dividing range. With him was Barrow Clayton, an experienced explorer and guide who had spent years studying the contours of Australia and its cultural heritage. The journey had not been easy, but the desire to understand the depths of local wisdom and find the meaning of existence gave him strength. They were heading inland, where settlers had rarely ventured, to meet the local Aborigines. They were accompanied by a sailor named Tarvin Southstraight, whose knowledge of shipping routes and trade helped them plan the voyage. In the distance they could already see the outlines of arid hills and plains, where the local winds tested their resolve. Elspeth Merrifield, a distant relative of York and the keeper of family secrets, urged caution as Ragnald Tempest, the colony's brutal guard commander, was beginning to grow suspicious of their journey. As they crossed the sun-baked pastures, the group first encountered Kumaranje, an old Aboriginal man whose eyes held ancient wisdom. Kumaranje was the one who kept ancestral lore, a bearer of sacred knowledge that eluded European eyes. He spoke of a path to survival that could not be measured by carnal hunger alone. York listened to every word, feeling a new light blazing in his soul. Meanwhile, Jaga Yalara, a young mediator between the tribes and the travelers, joined their group. He told them of the cruel history of his people's expulsion, of the misfortunes that had left a heavy mark on the land and in the hearts of the natives. His voice was filled with disgust at the foreigners, but also with surprise at the way the travelers shared the small supply of food. This act of kindness made him look at the Europeans in a different light. Reflections on greed and selflessness, on survival as an instinct, led York to a deep internal dialogue. Old Kumaranje then reminded him of the words spoken many generations ago: true improvement is possible only through selflessness. Remembering this, the hero decided to test himself in action, giving others the very last grains of his meager supply. Unexpectedly, the locals came to the rescue, demonstrating humanity where it was not expected. Barrow Clayton supported York through these trials, reminding him that the spirit of community and mutual aid was a real strength, capable of withstanding the winds of fate. On the next leg of their journey, after skirting the great sandy desert and climbing into the mountains, they met Kumaranje and Jaga Yalara again. The scars of past grievances were still alive, but they were already omens of change. One of the surviving messages from the ancestors was that in the not-too-distant future, a master would come with a peaceful and selfless method of cultivation. To hear this was to believe in the possibility of a new era, where people from different lands would unite, not only in appearance but also in spirit. Elspeth Merrifield, despite her business instincts, felt that these words softened her skepticism and kindled hope. York was curious about reincarnation and learned to overcome Western dogmas about life and death. The idea that the human soul could return and learn anew was a revelation to him. Sybil Ward, the traveller and chronicler who later wrote about these events, emphasized how these ideas were countered by the hardline attitude of the colony's commanders, especially Ragnald Tempest, who sought to suppress anything that disturbed the order. On the shore, by the famous rocks called the 12 Apostles, York was in awe. He looked at the time-eroded limestone and reflected on the fragility of everything visible. It dawned on him that only selflessness remained steadfast in this world of change and trial. Then he heard a quiet voice, like the whisper of the wind. The heart must remain open if one is to truly find the way. The mysterious shining light at the entrance to the cave in the Great Dividing Range Mountains became a symbol of mystery and transcendental knowledge for them. The researchers searched for practitioners who could reveal the secret of the perfect path for a long time. Although their search seemed fruitless, their hope did not fade. They felt that the boundary between the visible and the invisible was only thin, and that the real truth required patience and humility. Relationships between group members grew stronger, and selfless deeds served as a connecting link. Past grievances seemed less important than the desire for unification and inner growth. York increasingly understood that the path to improvement is not a solitary journey, but a shared journey, where every encounter and every manifestation is important. Kindness. The hero remembered the words of old Kumaranje about how the past and future are intertwined in an endless chain of reincarnations and lessons, that the soul of humanity goes through trials to reveal the true essence of existence. This understanding became for York a point of support on which he built his further searches and hopes. Walking towards the sunset, the group returned to Sydney with new knowledge and a sense that they would meet the one who would open the true path. In each heart was born a determination to share this light with others, so that no one would have to go through the pain and uncertainty that they had. Thus ended another stage of the great journey, heralding new discoveries and challenges. Finding light and faith in rebirth. York Ellsworth, the descendant of an English soldier, spent centuries searching for the truth that would lead him to the inner light. During his second major journey, he and Barrow Clayton and chronicler Sybil Ward travelled the roads of Australia, seeking confirmation of ancient stories of reincarnation and spiritual practice. Relationships with local Aborigines were strengthened through the mediation of Jaga Yalara, who opened new understandings and hope for selfless improvement. Old Kumaranje, who carried the wisdom of generations, was a source of guidance and inspiration for York. He told him that spiritual practices preserved in the mountains of New South Wales could reveal the true path, free from fear and doubt about the afterlife. "You must learn to embrace the unknown to find your true light," he said one evening around the campfire, his words penetrating deep into the hearts of his companions. On their journey to discover the true path, the group of travelers crossed harsh landscapes. Through the great sandy desert and ancient rocky trails, they walked, building trust in each other. One day, at the foot of the Great Dividing Range, Sybil noticed an unusual purple light coming from a small mountain cave. Intuition told her that this was no coincidence, but a sign that spiritual practitioners knew they were coming. Barrow, an experienced explorer, suggested that the light might be a message, a kind of signal from another world. Locals said that the entrance to the cave changed dimensions, and even the most desperate seekers sometimes left without an answer. Anxious anticipation gave way to admiration, because the strange light created an aura of mystery and hope. Jaga Yalara shared legends about the spirits of ancestors who protect those who truly strive for self-improvement. Deep down, York remembered Kumaranje's words that only selfless giving and caring for others could overcome the trials of fate. Despite the strong opposition represented by Ragnald Tempest, the colony's guard commander, who was born into the spirit of strict order and control, the explorers sought light through interaction with the native population. Elspeth Merrifield, a distant relative and businesswoman, carefully guarded family secrets that helped York better understand the fate of his ancestors. Family stories and observations made it possible to see that in times of food shortage and resources, people shared only what they had, and it was through this doing that the doors to spiritual processes opened. Ragnald's hard gaze echoed inner doubts about trust and survival, but meetings with Jaga Yalara and Kumaranje burned with the light of understanding, lifting the curtain on the past and the future. One day, sitting by the fire, York thought, if reincarnation exists, then perhaps this life is only a step on the path to infinite perfection. Sybil carefully recorded all the details, preserving them for posterity. Aboriginal stories filled with symbols and trials told of the coming of the teacher who would bring peace and truth to the world, as told by the guardians of the mountain paths. The energy of the violet light meeting filled the companions with a determination to carry the light of knowledge further. They returned to Sydney with the understanding that true improvement is possible only through service to others and inner growth. Tarvin Southstraight, a sailor and expert on the sea routes, helped share not only goods, but also stories of ancient traditions, linking the history of the colonies with the destinies of their people. With each kilometre of the journey, York felt a greater sense of oneness with the land, the people, and the universe, understanding that predestined relationships held the key to knowledge. His heart was filled with light when he met people willing to walk the righteous path despite the trials. Staying with them a little longer, he shared methods of selfless improvement, conveying the Aboriginal message of sharing what is left, no matter the consequences. Before leaving Australia, York expressed his wish that if he were granted rebirth, he would continue to spread the message, freeing future generations from the pain of searching and doubt. Sibel, feeling the responsibility of a chronicler, took on the task of bringing the story to the world, so that the inseparable link between the past and the future would not be broken. "May the light of this search never be extinguished," she said in the stillness of the night. Relationships with Elspeth and Barrow grew stronger, and together they plotted to preserve and expand the knowledge they had gained from their travels. In the face of new discoveries, they had to choose between fear and trust, between doubt and faith. As York studied ancient texts and legends, he felt his path becoming clearer, leading new students and keepers of the light. Thus ended one of the stages of York's endless journey, where every encounter and every word became bricks in the construction of eternal truth. History continued to live in the hearts of those who burned with a thirst for knowledge, striding into a bright future. And now, on the edge of a new dawn, their steps smoothly moved to the next stage of the search, where new secrets awaited their hour, and the light carried doubt into oblivion.